Oh, say, can you see by the dawn's early light what so proudly we hailed at the twilight's last gleaming, whose broad stripes and bright stars through the perilous fight o'er the ramparts we watched were so gallantly streaming, and the rockets would clear the bombs bursting in air, give proof through the night that our flag was still there. Oh, say, does that star-spangled banner yet wave o'er the land of the free and the home of the brave?
Let us bow our heads and hearts in prayer. Almighty God, on this Veterans Day, we honor and give thanks for the veterans of all branches of service that gave the ultimate sacrifice in duty to our country. We honor those who responded to the draft and all those who volunteered to serve. In foreign lands, our only request has been to have land for cemeteries for our fallen comrades. Thank you, Lord, for all of our veterans and active duty heroes who put their lives on the line to keep us all safe. Give us a fresh and renewed spirit of our thanks and appreciation for all of them. And now, Lord of all, we honor those who wear uniforms of our country in each brand of service. We pray for their safety and their work to provide protection for all citizens of this land. We pray this day, Lord God, that they receive blessings to know that they are appreciated. And now let us give thanks for our beautiful land, a land of abundance and freedom, and a beacon of liberty for all. Amen. The United States Army.
First to fight for the right and to build the nation's might, and the army goes rolling along. Proud of all we have done, fighting till the battle's won, and the army goes rolling along. Then it's hi, hi, hey, in the army's glorious way. Count off the cadence loud and strong. For wherever we go, we will always know that the army goes rolling along.
The United States Marines.
From the halls of Montezuma to the shores of Tripoli, we will fight our country's battles in the air, on land and sea. First to fight for right and freedom, and to keep our honor clean. We are proud to claim the title of United States Marines.
The United States Navy.
Anchors away, my boys, anchors away. Farewell to college joys, we sail the
the United States Air Force.
Off we go into the wild blue yonder, climbing high into the sun. Here we come, zooming to meet our thunder. At the noise, give her the gun. Down we dive, spouting our flame from under. Off with one hell of a roar. We live in fame or go down in flame. Nothing can stop the U.S. Air Force.
The United States Coast Guard.
We're always ready for the call. We place our trust in thee. Through surf and storm and howling gale, how high shall purpose be? Semper Paratus is our guide, our fame, our glory too. To fight and save or fight and die, I Coast Guard, we are for you.
My name is Glenn Rees. I'm a physician by training with board certifications in therapeutic radiology and aerospace medicine. I joined the Air Force in 1978 and retired in 1999. At my first assignment, I was a radiation therapist at Keesler Air Force Base in Biloxi, Mississippi. While there, I attended a classified briefing, and I just went because I had the clearance and I thought this would be neat. I'm getting out in 2 years, so there. And it was about the Soviet threat at the time. And I realized what a role the United States military was doing in combating this threat and keeping us alive and free. So I decided to make a career out of it. Eventually I became a flight surgeon, was stationed at Beale Air Force Base for 2 years, and then went to I was the base commander for medical services at Soesterberg Air Base in the Netherlands, which was a really enjoyable tour. But the favorite one, and I think where I did the most value, was to serve at the Armed Forces Radiobiology Research Institute, which is in Bethesda, Maryland. AFRI, as it's called for short, was formed during the 1950s and 1960s to research on the effects of neutron weapons in case there was a war in Europe with Soviet troops coming across the Fulda Gap. And we were supposed to analyze the medical effects of radiation and how it could be used to stop an invading army of Soviet troops. So shortly after I arrived at AFRI, the Soviet Union collapsed. I'm not sure how the two events are related, but that's what happened. And the United States, in order to keep Soviet scientists with weapons expertise from migrating south to Iran, Iraq, some other places where we'd rather not have them and their expertise, invented Project Brain Drain. What this did, it allowed the Soviet scientists and physicians to stay in place, and the United States would fund them to publish their work. It had to be unclassified. It had to have nothing to do with weapons design or production. So my job was to look at the long-term effects of radiation on personnel. That was the official title. I got to make several trips to the former Soviet Union. Again, that was back in the days before Russian collusion was fashionable. My first time there, I really back up to two very memorable characters. One was a Kazakhstani physician named Saim Balmukhanov. The other was a Russian molecular geneticist named Valery Soifer. Soifer was one of three people President Reagan requested that Gorbachev, by name, release from a Soviet Union prison. I won't go into the details of how he got thrown into prison, but basically he stood up for Andrei Sakharov, the father of the Soviet H-bomb, who had been kicked out of the Academy of Sciences for turning around and saying we shouldn't use this type of weapon. So Soifer had a lot of scientific contacts in Russia. And I went to the nuclear weapons test site in Semipalatinsk, Kazakhstan, several times to get reports on the effects of fallout on civilians living in the area, the effects of radiation on personnel working in the production plants. Early in their program, the Soviets would dump their waste from a plutonium production plant directly into the Checha River. After a couple of years, they decided, why don't we survey this area? And they wound up evacuating about 22,000 people from 16 villages. So one of our papers was concerned with the effects of chronic radiation syndrome. When the Russians started their nuclear weapons program, they were playing catch-up ball with the United States. They're about 3 years behind. It was not until 1949 that they detonated their first weapon. Because they were hurrying up, they tended to slack off on safety precaution, both for the workers at the plant and also for some of the people who were downwind from the Semipalatinsk test site in Kazakhstan. Kazakhstan is a very large area, 2/3 the size of the U.S., with only a few million population, so there was this large semi-desert area where the fallout could travel, and on a few occasions they would have to evacuate the villages. They couldn't tell them why, but they would see a bright flash the next morning, and then after a few days be allowed to return. However, some of the villagers would sneak back in to milk their goats and their cattle because they couldn't leave them alone for that length of time. So we had about 24 contract reports on the effects of radiation on personnel and on civilian populations, plus a few other side projects, one dealing with the effects of neutron radiation, and then what compounds would serve as protectors or antagonists toward radiation damage. So that was the scientific part of the program. But of course the fun part was getting to meet the Soviet people. I had the privilege of, along with Professor Soifer, meeting Professor Saim Balmakhanov, who is, like myself, a radiation oncologist, but with much greater experience. And then Soifer and Balmakhanov didn't know one another, but on one of our trips to Moscow, Soifer said to me, Glenn, he had a heavy Russian accent, I want to show you my favorite site in all Russia. We were in Moscow. And so I said, sure, that'd be fine. So Soifer said, okay. His driver was a fellow named Kiselyov, who, and this is kind of important, who had helped keep Soifer alive in terms of employment while he was on the outs with the Soviet Academy of Sciences for standing up for the banning of the H-bomb. So Kiselyov was driving the car, and Soifer was pointing out the window, and I could read a little bit of Cyrillic, and I saw a sign that said Lubyanka. Lubyanka. That's the KGB prison headquarters. And I said, okay. So we were heading down the highway, and then Soifer said, Glenn, there's my favorite site in all Russia. So I got out my camera, and I couldn't see what he was talking about. So I said, I didn't see it. Oh, okay. Well, he had Kiselyov turn around, go back, and then turn around one more time. So he said, Glenn, do you see it? And this time I did see what he was pointing at. In front of Lubyanka prison had been a statue of Felix Dzerzhinsky, who was the founder of the NKVD, the predecessor to the KGB, FSB. He's a very cruel and evil man, but they had built a statue upon a pedestal for him while Lubyanka was up and running. They had torn down this statue, and I have a picture that shows where they had put up a cross. And Soifer, who is Jewish, said, Glenn, this is my favorite site in all Russia because it demonstrated that in the very prison where he had been interrogated, the communists for them had been crushed down and religion allowed to, once more show its head. So I got the picture, and then he said, "Did you get it?" I said, "Yes." "Okay, we better go now." And yeah, we have a refusnik, Seufer, a guy who helped him, Kiselyov, and a U.S. Air Force colonel out of uniform taking pictures of Lubyanka. So I said, yeah, we better go. And we did. There have been a lot of people who face far more danger, far more hardship in a career, but pursuing these data and getting these publications out, that was fun.
I'm Bob McCracken. I'm a Navy veteran, dates from late 1942 until mid-June of 46. I need to tell you about the old battleship, the USS New York. She fought in both World Wars. When the U.S. joined the World War I European War, she was sent to the North Sea, and there she guarded against German shipping coming out of the North Sea ports. And that was a very limited duty. She never fired a shot. In World War II early, she was on convoy duty. She made 6 convoy trips to New York, or to Scotland, England, and Casablanca, and never lost any of the shipping that she was guarding. And in her last trip into Casablanca, then she was taken on into the Mediterranean to soften up a port where they needed to make an invasion, and that was the first big usage of her main battery guns, which of course was the main thing of a battleship, was to use those big guns. They could lay way out, and the enemy usually didn't have anything to throw back. So she softened up this, but then she was taken back to the Chesapeake Bay, and for the next 2 years, or plus or minus, she was a gunnery school. They took on recruits every weekend out of Norfolk, and they went out in the bay and fired all, because she had every gun the Navy owned. And they were teaching the young recruits to use those weapons. So, and since we were in, this was the period when I was aboard, was that period in the Chesapeake. We were back in Norfolk every weekend to discharge the recruits that had been on there for 2 weeks and to take on a new group. So being in there every Saturday night, I was, a couple of secrets that most people don't know. Aircraft carriers and battleships had 20-piece bands aboard. I was a member of the band on the battleship. And so on some of these Saturday nights, we had to go play a dance somewhere. well, not had to go, we loved to go, because what else did we have to do? So the story goes that along toward midnight, when the dance would be over, sailors from all over our ship would show up. They had two reasons. Now you need to know another secret. When you go aboard a Navy ship, you must declare anything you're carrying, and if your clothing looks a little puffy, you're going to get patted down. And you know what that was against. Well, when we went back aboard, all of these strangers that had not been a part of this dance, they either wanted a free ride back to the ship because we had a big bus and there weren't that many of us, or they had a bottle of booze. And they knew that they did not make us open our instrument cases going back aboard. So we became the ship's smugglers. Now, the old crew of the New York was invited to both the christening and the commissioning of the new New York. And the commissioning was in 2009. And then in 2011 we had another reunion, and I went to both the christening and the commissioning of the new ship. So I was acquainted with her, and in 2011 we had an old ship reunion at Virginia Beach. And the new New York was in port at that time at Norfolk. So we were invited to go down for dinner. Well, after that dinner, someone suggested the captain of the new New York was there. He was a part of our dinner. Somebody suggested that I go tell him this story about bringing the booze aboard. Well, the picture that I've just given to Nada shows you his reaction, and I hope you can use it in this little presentation. Thank you.
When Johnny comes marching home again, hurrah, hurrah, we'll give him a hearty welcome then, hurrah, hurrah. Oh, the men will cheer and the boys will shout, the ladies, they will all turn out and we'll all feel proud when Johnny comes marching home, and we'll all feel proud when Johnny comes marching home.
My name is Walter Oleskowitz. I was with the 36th Infantry Division in Europe, 1945. And there are some interesting things that the Army does that sometimes we enlisted men did not expect. For example, the Army and even the enlisted men knew that if possible, try to use the element of surprise in any attack that you might be making. That'll catch the enemy off guard. Unfortunately, in my situation, it turned out that the element of surprise was not for the enemy, but for us. It turned out that we were supposed to open up a road for a whole bunch of military to go through. It was nearing the end of the war, March 15th, the Ides of March. So it turned out that it didn't work out the way the officers planned, because we were surprised the enemy, but the enemy surprised us. Someone volunteered our unit, one of the officers, to try to take this town called Bischoffen. And what happened was, we didn't surprise them, they surprised us. They didn't tell us that we were going to go through a minefield. It turned out that I was with the company platoon and I had a radio, one of those big heavy radios on my back. So anyhow, what happened was the minefield was the shoe mines. If you walked in there, you're bound to get hurt. In fact, some people even stepped on a mine and fell down and hit another mine in their face. So it was not a very pleasant day. It turned out that after a few were injured going in, since I was in the company platoon with the radio, I called for a tank to come. And then I figured that the tank is going to make a way for us where we can walk in and not step on any of the mines. It turned out that we saved quite a few people that way because a few were already injured. I was so surprised. I should have suspected something because normally we have 1 or 2 medics, and this time they had about 8. But it turned out, I found out later, that the whole front, all the way across Germany, was taking off at the same time. It was nearing the end of the war. So anyhow, when a few people got injured, I managed to call back for a tank. The tank came and rode towards the minefield, and we were able to, as many of us as were still there, to walk in those tracks and avoid any further injuries. So I normally saw 1 or 2 medics. And like I said, there were about 8 of them. That led to a suspicion that something was funny afoot. So anyhow, after getting the idea, after several were injured, of using the tank, we were able to walk in the tracks of the tank and join with the troops that were ahead of us, because we came in from 2 different sides, and then we managed to finish the job of opening that road, and a whole bunch of equipment was able to go right through along the whole front of Germany, way from down south all the way up north. This was all in 1945. And I could have avoided even being in that unit because I had a twin brother, and he was in the cavalry headed by movie star Tim Holt. And if I had joined him, I wouldn't have any of this experience. But anyhow, being Polish, I really felt that I didn't want to go in the cavalry with my brother, twin brother. So I did go into the service. And when I finally came out, they awarded me, because of what I did, the Silver Star. And I always cherished. And the Army did always take pretty good care of you. And there were also some men in the Army that were born to be soldiers. I mean, they knew how to get that enemy out of wherever he was, even if they had a curse. But they were just absolutely fantastic. And they made life a little bit more pleasant for some of us. Thank you.
My name is Jack Stanfield. When the Korean War broke out in 1950, I was in the 2nd year of college studying pharmacy. At the end of the semester, I decided to drop out and join the Navy. I was sent to Great Lakes Naval Training Center up north of Chicago, where I took my basic training. After basic training, I was assigned to go to Hospital Corps School. I went to Hospital Corps School for 20-some weeks. At the time I graduated from Hospital Corps School, I was then assigned to the Naval Hospital at Great Lakes on the orthopedic ward. Most of the patients we had on that orthopedic ward were casualties from Korea. I was there for probably 2 or 3 months, and I was reassigned as ship's company at Great Lakes in the pharmacy, where I was in charge of something that was very, very dear to my heart, alcohol and narcotics. I stayed there in that position for probably about 12 months, 10 months. I was then transferred to the Marines. I was transferred to Camp Pendleton, California, where I immediately went to field medical school and basic training as a Marine. After completing that 6-week course, I was boarded a troop ship in San Diego Harbor and went to Incheon, Korea. Upon arrival in Incheon, I was assigned as a corpsman to the item company of the 3-7 Marines. Item company was on the front lines. I joined the Marines there, and I'll tell you, they took care of me, and I took care of them. We went on a lot of patrols, and when we went on patrol, I gave them battle dressings because I did not carry a medical bag. All I carried was morphine and some medical instruments, some instruments. I said, if you get shot up, you got to have your own battle dressings. I carried my sidearm was a 45, but I had a carbine, which I also carried. And I was there for a little over 2 months. And corpsmen were rotated off of the front lines. We did about 2 months or 3 months at the most, and then you were sent back to field hospital. On about July 7th or 8th, I got orders that I should report back to the field hospital as soon as my replacement came. Well, on July 10th, my replacement was not there, and we went on patrol. That night, we were way out in front of the MLR, main line of resistance, going across a little valley with a rice paddy, and as we were going across, they illuminated the area. We were sitting ducks out in the open with no cover, with all illumination. They immediately started dropping mortars on us. The first mortar landed right on the lieutenant next to me. 2 or 3 more mortars come in, and there was only 2 of us in the front. We were on the point. If you don't know anything about patrols, you have a point, 4 people, and then you have your lieutenant, the lieutenant, head sergeant, medical, me, and a radio man. Well, when everybody was killed except the radio man and I, we were the only 2 that were left living. We laid there for probably 3 or 4 hours, giving ourselves morphine and things. And then illumination stopped. They were scraping us with machine guns all this time, just back and forth between mortars. It got dark, so we said, let's see if we can get up and get out of here. Well, I got up, and I made about 15 steps, and I got shot again. And I went over into the rice paddy. The next thing I knew, 4 Marines were picking me up, taking me back. They took me back to the main line of resistance, and I found out later who gave me first aid when I got back. That was my replacement. I was flown out to the hospital ship I spent some time on a hospital ship, and then they flew me to Yokohama Naval Hospital. I was in Yokohama Naval Hospital for approximately 4 weeks. And then they flew me to Hawaii. And I was in the hospital in Hawaii, recuperating, all of us on the plane, recuperating for the flight for about 10 days. Then we flew to California. And when I arrived in California, surprise of our life, who comes on the plane when we land but Bob Hope? He came on welcoming us back and said he wanted to give us all a phone call home as soon as we got to the hospital. So then I was transferred to Mare Island Hospital, stayed there only about a week, and I was flown to Great Lakes. Where did I go to Great Lakes? The orthopedic ward, where I started out. I spent quite a few months there. I was wounded on July 10th. I was discharged from the hospital on April 1st the next year. And at the same day, I received medical discharge from the service, receiving 60% disability. I have great admiration for the Marines, and you know why. They saved me. And I have great admiration for this day, because it's the only time that the American citizens take time, really, to say thank you to the men and women who serve this country. And there's many of them in every service. God bless America.
Was blind, but now
Hi, I'm Harvey Noe, and I'm a retired Air Force after 37 years. I'm originally from Platteville, Colorado, where I was a dirt farmer, or should I say vegetable farmer, for many years. I joined the Air Force in 1950, and just as soon as I got in, right after I finished basic training, I was, if you can imagine, I was selected as a drill instructor. Now, in the movies today, you see drill instructors, that are 6 feet tall or higher, and they weigh about 250 pounds. Well, if you can imagine, in 1950, I was lucky to hit 100 pounds, and I was 5'4". So if you can see a drill instructor running around and screaming and hollering at all these kids, well, that was me. But I managed to survive 2.5 years, all through the Korean War, as a drill instructor. And one thing that I noticed that a lot of the veterans here will probably agree with me is that in those days, if you were military, they had the wrong connotation of what you were. They thought us military were mean, structured, and all we did was complain and this type of thing. But just for a couple of minutes, what I would like to do is say what we did actually train the military to do. Number one, we taught them to have a personality. In other words, we wanted them to be able to get along with people. This, which we don't see too often anymore with the young soldiers that are coming in, or the young civilians who are turned into soldiers. Then we teach them how to be polite, how to act at dinner, how to walk down the street, be proud, stand up tall, and we always told them this one story, is that you can be the best dressed soldier in the world, and next to you will be a soldier that is sloppy, that is wearing a uniform that is not ironed. And guess who they see? They see the unironed, raunchy soldier. And what does everybody say? Well, look at that raunchy old soldier walking down there. They don't see you. But that is where we get that reputation. And those were just a few of the things besides combat training and how to fire weapons and so forth that we went through in teaching our young kids. And in 1950, when they went through, we also taught them and made them understand and feel what gas is like. Now, if you remember World War II, or during World War II, we still had a lot of problems with some of these foreign countries using different types of gas, mustard, crying gas, and so forth. And these were the things that we taught them on the military side. But all in all, we taught the soldiers and the airmen and the rest of the young service members coming in how to be a person, how to appreciate people, and how not to be gruff and be the military man that you always see in the newspapers or in the movies. You see it in the movies all the time. So these are the things that we had to fight. After I finished with basic training, or as a DI or as a drill instructor, I was, the Korean War started to drop back in 1952. And so in 1953, they allowed us drill instructors to go back and get any job or take any job that we wanted to take. Well, I ended up as a administrative technician at 10th Air Force in Selfridge Air Force Base, Michigan. And the commander there, the general, decided that he wanted a drill team. And since I was one of the 15 drill sergeants or drill instructors in the group, I was nominated as the person to go ahead and be a drill instructor. Well, that turned into my being from a drill instructor going into more public relations, and I was assigned as a public affairs specialist, which I stayed in for many years. One of the things that I do remember, and I think I still have the record, and I don't believe any other public affairs person, enlisted man, will ever be able to match what I did, mainly because of the technology that they have in flying airplanes and that type. I was able to get a ride or fly and do missions on every jet fighter in the F-100 series. And when I'm talking about the F-100 series, I'm talking about the airplanes that were numbered, and they were manufactured in those days, and they were given numbers like 100, 102, 104, 105, and 106, and then we went to the F models, which was the F-4s, and to the planes that we are flying here today. But I was lucky enough to ride on missions with pilots in those aircraft. And talking about the first time that I went up, a crew chief came up and gave me a brown bag. And that was in a training flight on a T-33, which is the very first jet that they came out with. And anyway, I said, "What is this for?" And he said, "That is in case you have to throw up." He says, "If you get sick, you use the bag, or you clean the bottom and you clean your mess up in the airplane." And I looked down and I saw a bunch of wires and so forth, and I said, I'm not going to get sick. So I did not get sick after that. And after that, flying jet aircraft was very easy. I was also, in my career, I became a public affairs person. In other words, I would go around and cover all these events as a reporter, a photographer, and finally the Air Force said, "You're going to be a photojournalist if you're going to do both jobs. You have to have a career with both, being able to do both." So from there, I went to the Pacific Stars and Stripes, and I worked there for 4 years. 3 years of it was in Okinawa, and I covered the whole island, and as the bureau chief, and I had 2 people working for me. Then when I came back, I was lucky enough to get assigned to the Air Defense Command, which was in charge of running the air defense of the United States, the Air Force side. And this was a time when we had civilian volunteers who would man the forest ranger stations up in the mountains, because that's where the airplanes at that time would be coming through or coming over. So they were there, and they had with them a little sheet that showed a silhouette of each type of aircraft that the enemy had at that time. And of course, our enemy at that time was Russia. And but one thing I think a lot of people don't remember is that during World War II, the United States or Canada or Mexico or the South America never had to worry about getting bombed. And the main reason was that we had the Atlantic Ocean on one side and the Pacific Ocean on the other, which made it very near impossible. But then in I would say about 1962 or 63, the Russians had developed their big bombers with the 4 engines, and they were flying just before the the Cuban crisis were flying their big bombers from Russia to Cuba. And as you know, Cuba is south of Florida by 90 miles. During the Cuban crisis, I was assigned to go down to Florida and cover the military assembly down in around Miami and so forth. But one thing that I saw down there, and I was that the young airmen that we had working on the airplanes and doing all those things that to keep the planes up in the air all the time. And there's one funny story that happened during that assignment, and that was one day a mother in a station wagon had 3 of her kids, or thought she did. She had 3 kids, and she came to the gate, and it was packed full of suitcases and so forth. The security police asked her where she was going, and she says, "I'm going home to Minnesota because of all this scare down here with these missiles." And the air policeman looked through the car and said, "What children, ma'am?" And she says, "Oh my gosh, I left them at home." So she had to turn around and go back. But she did end up leaving the base finally and going up to Michigan or Minnesota. Well, what I was privileged to see, the growth of the Air Defense Command and the Air Force at that time. As we went into different fighters, our mission changed because our mission was now to get the information from the people that were attacking the U.S., which was in airplanes. And this is where the Ground Observer Corps came in. At that time, we had radar, but the radar was very simple. And if you all probably remember, and especially all you veterans will remember the guys with a big radar, with a big board, and they had the United States on it, and the young kids on the back riding backwards as the airplanes were coming in towards their target. Well, we didn't have to worry about that afterwards because the radar was able to pick them up, and the radar information was now put into big cement shelters called air warfare buildings. And in there we had the big charts, the big maps of the United States, and so Air Defense Command went from there. Well, after that, I was assigned as the Assistant Sports Information Director for the Air Force Academy, which had just opened up, and that was in 1963. And I stayed there until I went to Vietnam in 1967. And from there, where I was lucky enough to be in Saigon, or not Saigon, but in Okinawa when Bob Hope came through. And of course, with him, he had all of his actresses that came along with him. And then I got to see him again in Vietnam when I was assigned to Vietnam in '68. And also at that time was when President Nixon came through. So my career in the public affairs became very interesting. I did put in 20 years as active duty and retired, and I was one of those lucky persons who was able to fill his position up as a civilian when I retired, and which I did, and I worked as an Air Force civilian for 17 years, giving me a total of 37 years serving our country, which I am proud of, and I will do any time from now on. And I would like to thank you all for listening to me, and I hope that you veterans out there and I can keep serving and protecting our country. Thank you very much.
This is Harold Peterson, who was a chaplain with the 47th Division, the Viking Division out of Minnesota, the Army National Guard. And I'm going to tell you a little bit about my experience with the National Guard of Minnesota. But to start off with, I'm going to begin by making some comments regarding the Sunflower RV Resort. And the reason I am is because I've been a preacher there for, maybe 20 years, usually 3 times during the season. It's a bunch of retired pastors that serve there. That resort of Sunflower holds about 1,200 sites, so it's a large group. And normally about 300 to 400 attend the worship services there. And there's usually about 20 or 30 in the choir. So it's been a very, very needful thing. And many of us pastors, about a dozen of us that serve there, feel it's very valuable. I remember one Sunday, it's a number of years ago now, that I spoke at the day, it was Veterans Day for the weekend. And I thought I'm going to give a little bit of my experience with what I did for those years, beginning in 1957 for about 6 years. I told a little bit about how I began with, and the reason for beginning was that I really admired my Uncle Clarence, who served in the Battle of the Bulge and survived it. And I became very well acquainted with him after he came back. So I told a little bit about the experience there, and I started by saying to the effect that back in the 1950s, there was the draft. So as a result, I would naturally have a classification. Well, in the 50s, I was in graduate school at Luther Seminary in St. Paul, Minnesota. So my draft classification was something unusual. It was 4D, not 4F, 4D. And when I was speaking about this, I explained that the classification 4D was for people in graduate school at the time of the draft, and it was for also the mentally retarded. One of the sopranos said, "Harold, were you each one?" So I said, "You know the rest." Well, at any rate, I began work in the National Guard by going to units all over the state of Minnesota. And I had a person named Major Scott who many times would fly me around in a Bell helicopter, wide open, no doors, just straps to hold you up. And sometimes if he had 2 or 3 people that he was to drop off at different units, he would take a Beaver, which was a very slow plane, but it worked and it served. The instructions that we were given at that time was to teach courses in these units called character guidance. Turned out, though, much of what I did was counseling, and a lot of it was not only just doing the counseling at that meeting, but it also had follow-up. So it included a lot of extra time that I spent not on duty of the National Guard. We also went to summer training, and there I was blessed to know a lot of other pastors who served in that entire division. The 47th Division was very large, and it had many, many companies. As a matter of fact, my nephew, Andrew, has been on duty and deployed in Iraq for over a year. He's just coming home this week. But anyway, I told a little bit about those experiences and was able to find out from people what the different denominations were all about, because I was only associated for Lutherans for many years, even in my work. But I learned to know all the others. One of my experiences as a post-chaplain was to arrange things for a certain number of days when I was in summer camp, because summer camp lasted for 2 weeks, and it was at Little Falls, Minnesota. I had a call from a rabbi in St. Paul who said, "I would like to come up there and have a meeting of my people for a Saturday evening worship. And would you please gather 10 people, because that's required, And I said, okay, I'll search. So I got in my Jeep and checked around and found all people that I could find that I knew that were on the roster. I found 9. And all of a sudden I began to find out I needed one more, of course. So I checked the roster again and discovered there was one who was Jewish who was serving as a guard in the munitions bin. So I was able to contact him, and I said, can you get off for this? He says, no. So I finally called back to the chaplain and I said, would you mind if you come and bring the group over to the munitions so that you can have the 10 which you need? He said, great. So I served as a post chaplain occasionally with the summer training camp. I'm blessed to know a number of pastors who were chaplains. I grew up on a farm and I knew something about rifles and munitions because I was a hunter. I went to the rifle range in the summer, although most chaplains didn't, and I appealed to people to let me go through the rounds. I qualified in most things from a 45 up to 105 Hauser on a half track. So my experience was really quite interesting, and I'm very thankful for what I was able to do as a serv. And God bless America.
If tomorrow all the things were gone, I'd worked for all my life, and I had to start again with just my children and my wife. I thank my lucky stars to be living here today, 'cause the flag still stands for freedom, and they can't take that away. To be an American, where at least I know I'm free. And I won't forget the men who died, who gave that right to me. And I gladly stand up next to you and defend her still today. 'Cause there ain't no doubt I love this land. God bless the USA. From the lakes of Minnesota to the hills of Tennessee, across the plains of Texas, from sea to shining sea, Detroit down to Houston, and New York to LA, where there's pride in every American heart, and it's time to stand and say I'm proud to be an American, where at least I know I'm free. And I won't forget the men who died, who gave that right to me. And I gladly stand up next to you and defend her still today. 'Cause there ain't no doubt I love this land. God bless the USA. Defend her still today, 'cause there ain't no doubt I love this land. God bless the USA.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Hi, I'm Fred Dorgan. The Korean War broke out in 1950, the same year I turned 18 years old and enlisted in the United States Air Force for 4 years. I spent 2 of those years in the Korean War zone, and that's when I really learned to love our country and our flag. I'd like to read you a little poem about that flag. I walked through a county courthouse square, and on a park bench, an old man was sitting there. I said, "Your old courthouse is kind of run down." He said, "Nah, it'll work for our little town." I said, "Your old flagpole is kind of leaning a bit, and that's a rugged old flag that you got hanging on it." He said, "Have a seat." And I sat down. "Is this the first time you've been to our little town?" I said, "I think it is." He said, "I don't like to brag, but we're kind of proud of that ragged old flag. You see, we got a hole in it down there when Washington took it across the Delaware, and it got powder burned the night that Francis Scott Key sat watching it and writing, 'Oh, say, can you see?' And it got a bad rip in New Orleans with Andy Jackson tugging at its seams. And it almost fell at the Alamo beside the Texas flag, but she waved on through. She got a cut with a sword at Chancellorsville, and there was another cut at Shiloh Hill. There was Robert E. Lee, Beauregard, and Bragg, and the South boys really turned on that ragged old flag. In Flanders Field in World War I, she got a big hole from a Bertha gun, and she turned blood red in World War II, and she hung limp and low a time or two. She was in Korea and Vietnam. She went where she was sent by Uncle Sam. She waved from our ships on the briny foam, and now they've quit waving her back here at home. In her own good land, she's been abused, she's been burned, she's been dishonored, denied, and refused. And the government for which she stands is scandalized throughout the land. But you know, she's in good shape for the shape she's in. She's been through a lot of fire before, and I believe she can go through a whole lot more. So we raise her up every morning. We take her down every night. We don't let her touch the ground, and we fold her upright. You know, on second thought, I do like to brag. I'm pretty proud of that ragged old flag. God bless you, and God bless America.
With sword, we